An event that seemed impossible unfolded inside Buckingham Palace. In a shocking turn of events, the British royal family confirmed a heartbreaking tragedy that stunned and baffled the world. The announcement came as a complete surprise, shaking Britain to its very foundations and spreading shock and grief globally, from London to Sydney and beyond. For generations, the palace had been a symbol of stability, power, and longevity. But at this moment, that seemingly immutable image appeared to have crumbled. And the question everyone is asking themselves is incredibly simple. What really happened behind those closed royal gates? Join us as we trace the entire story of this tragic day. A day many believe has left an irreversible mark on the monarchy. Before we delve deeper, subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts below, and prepare yourself for a moment the world will probably never forget. That morning began with an unusual tranquility, a kind of stillness that made it impossible to imagine that just hours later, everything would be completely different. The early morning sun cast a soft golden hue over Buckingham Palace. The courtyard bustled with its usual rhythm, and staff went about their work as usual. At first glance, there were no signs of impending trouble. But then the atmosphere began to shift. The palace's usually precise rhythm of life suddenly became erratic. Phones rang incessantly from early morning. Important meetings were canceled without explanation. Senior aides appeared constantly in the corridors, their footsteps hurried, their eyes heavy with worry. An inexplicable silence spread, broken only by hurried footsteps and abruptly interrupted conversations, leaving a lingering sense of unease in the air. As the morning progressed, this feeling became more pronounced. The familiar polite smiles vanished. Staff avoided eye contact. Information was no longer being sent through internal channels, but was being passed around discreetly. The communications department, usually operating publicly, was suddenly shut down. Outside the gates, reporters began to notice unusual signs. Security vehicles were appearing more frequently. Some side entrances were being used again. Guards were constantly changing positions without any explanation. Clearly, something serious enough to disrupt the previously impenetrable order was happening inside those walls. By noon, fragmented information began to leak out. The press exchanged information cautiously, trying to piece together the small details. Some called it a major incident. Others described it as unprecedentedly worrying. In a short time, speculation spread, and social media was flooded with conflicting rumors. For the first time, even veteran royal reporters admitted they were completely caught off guard. Then, without warning, the official royal website abruptly went blank. Minutes later, it reappeared with a brief announcement. The formal lettering on a white background, accompanied by the familiar emblem, carried a weight that left readers speechless. The announcement simply acknowledged a profoundly sad event had occurred, offered thanks to the public, and requested respect for the family's privacy during this unimaginable time. No details, no explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement of a loss. The impact was almost immediate. Television programs switched to live broadcasts. Phones rang incessantly in offices, schools, and homes. Many stopped what they were doing to follow the news. Outside the palace gates, crowds began to gather, their faces somber, their eyes heavy with grief. Reporters lowered their voices as they delivered the news. The camera captured the growing crowd, while the guards remained motionless in their positions, amidst an unprecedentedly heavy atmosphere. The silence now lacked the familiar air of discipline, becoming a mirror reflecting profound grief. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was suffocatingly thick. Employees who had served for decades later recounted that they had never witnessed such a quiet Buckingham Palace. Some were quietly dismissed early. Others were asked to remain, waiting in a state of uncertainty, not knowing what would happen next. The corridors that had once echoed with conversation now stretched endlessly, bathed in cold light, where only bewildered eyes and countless unanswered questions remained. As night fell, news spread beyond the borders of England. From Washington to Sydney, newspapers repeated a haunting phrase, mentioning a tragedy at the palace. The world watched in silence, yet Buckingham Palace offered no further information beyond its initial statement. Behind those magnificent walls, time seemed to slow down. Something unimaginable had happened, and the familiar sense of security of the monarchy seemed to have crumbled. Then another message appeared, shrouded in profound grief. When it was published, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. There was no warning, no preparation, just the familiar royal emblem alongside a few short lines. Yet it was enough to change the atmosphere of an entire day. The words were carefully chosen, carrying the palpable sense of loss in every sentence. The message spoke of an event that had shaken families and left a scar on the nation. The tone was distinctly different from previous pronouncements. Not distant, not formal, but trembling, intimate, and deeply human. Immediately afterward, television broadcasts across England were interrupted. Announcers went on air with tense faces, their voices low and hesitant as they reread the message. In living rooms, offices, and cafes, everyone fell silent. The calm but heavy words rang out, carefully prepared but unable to conceal the underlying sadness. The royal family, always seen as a symbol of composure and steadfastness, now appeared more fragile than ever. In just a few short sentences, the tragedy was not only acknowledged, but the emotions were also revealed, and the public could clearly feel it. Outside Buckingham Palace, the first signs of the mourning atmosphere gradually became apparent. People came in silence, not out of curiosity, but drawn in by an indescribable pull. Some carried simple bouquets of flowers. Others held photographs recalling brighter moments of the royal family. Many arrived empty-handed, standing silently before the gates, as if this place had become the center of shared grief. The air was cold, quiet, and heavy, mingled with the soft sobs and the monotonous sound of live news broadcasts. Everyday life came to a standstill. Shops and schools came to a halt. Teachers struggled to explain the situation to the bewildered children. In small towns, innocent questions echoed in classrooms. In large cities, strangers huddled together, whispering, asking if they had heard the news. Many stepped out into the streets just to hear the church bells ringing in unison. The sound spread across fields, streets, and urban areas, evoking memories of times the nation had mourned together. But this time, the feeling was different. It came quickly, spread widely, and was deeply personal. On social media, posts flooded in, familiar royal names quickly becoming global focal points, along with images capturing the somber moment of Prince William and his family. Time seemed to be submerged in prayers, doubt, and profound compassion. From celebrities and leaders to ordinary people, all joined in a common voice, creating a global wave of sorrow, solidarity, and grief. As darkness fell, the crowd outside the palace grew larger. Candlelight flickered in the wind. Flowers covered the pathways, interspersed with small pieces of paper with shaky handwriting attached to the fence. A mother clutched her daughter's hand, bending down to place a single rose among hundreds of others. Elderly couples stood silently, tears rolling down faces that had been bound together for generations. The palace lights still shone brightly behind the iron gates, reflecting off the rain-soaked stone. The official announcement offered no details, leaving only a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. But that was enough to shake a nation accustomed to the calm and formality of royalty. This moment was unlike anything before. The fortress of tradition had revealed its heart. For the first time in many people's memory, the royal family and the public bowed their heads in shared grief, not for ceremony, but for a loss that left everyone vulnerable to the storm brewing outside the gates. Just minutes after the news was announced, people began to quietly gather, initially hesitant, then drawn by an invisible force, an instinct to be near the heart of the tragedy. Some carried bouquets of flowers still wrapped in paper. Others held family photos. Many arrived empty-handed, their faces pale with disbelief. Soft sobs mingled with whispers, the clicking of cameras, and the heavy sound of footsteps on the wet pavement. Time seemed to slow down, not only in the major cities, but also in the quietest small towns. In living rooms, television screens flickered incessantly. On the radio, choked words were repeated. Teachers paused their lectures. Shops halted their business. Strangers looked at each other, whispering a single question, Have you heard the news? The entire country was plunged into shock and grief. Before anyone could fully comprehend the extent of the loss, church bells began to ring everywhere. From the majestic cathedrals of London to the small chapels of the countryside, the solemn sound spread across the fields and streets, not by command, but as a shared reflex of sorrow. People stepped out of their homes, standing silently to listen. Each bell chime in the wind was a reminder that pain knows no boundaries. Loss can connect even the most distant hearts around the world. On social media, emotions surged. Images of Buckingham Palace gates, royal symbols, and family moments were shared extensively. Tags beginning with surnames quickly became a global trend. A digital memorial formed almost instantly, before many could even process the news. Condolences poured in from across the continents. Some prayed in silence. Others reposted happy moments as a way to hold on to memories. And countless others simply wrote a few short lines, saying they couldn't believe this had happened. From public figures and celebrities to world leaders and anonymous individuals, all raised their voices in grief, creating a wave of emotion that spread globally. Outside the palace, thousands gathered silently, their presence a silent, unspoken expression of shared grief. The crowd grew denser as a cold wind swept through, carrying the scent of fresh flowers and smoldering candles. A little girl bent down to place a single rose before the iron gate, while beside her, her mother quietly wiped away silent tears. Elderly couples held hands, gazing up at the palace's towering windows, as if seeking a fragile solace that might never come. Police officers moved gently through the crowd, guiding people step by step to lay flowers in remembrance. There was no protest, no anger, only the heavy silence of a shared loss. As darkness fell, Buckingham Palace glowed behind the iron fence. The soft yellow light cast a gentle glow against the dark sky, creating a scene both solemn and poignant. Reporters stood outside, speaking in low, almost whispering voices, as if any loud sound could shatter the fragile silence. The monarchy had long been seen as a symbol of resilience and composure. Yet at this moment, those impenetrable walls seemed more fragile than ever. The familiar majesty was obscured by pain, by silence, by tears and flickering candlelight, all speaking volumes more than any official statement could convey. The storm outside the gates was not outrage, but a surging wave of grief, silent yet powerful. Inside the palace, the royal family, renowned for their ability to maintain composure and etiquette, were now consumed by profound sorrow. Those present recounted that the atmosphere was so heavy it was almost palpable, as if the pain itself had taken shape, permeating every corridor. Advisors walked in silent steps. The conversations were reduced to whispers. Even staff members who had served for decades, witnessing both glory and crisis, silently shed tears in secluded corners. The bodyguards, trained to maintain a poker face, couldn't hide the heavy burden in their eyes. At dawn, an emergency meeting was held in a private room. Senior members of the royal family sat huddled under the cold chandelier, their faces gaunt and pale from lack of sleep and grief. Advisors presented what needed to be done, though everyone understood that no decision could alleviate this loss. The king sat in the chairman's seat, almost motionless throughout the meeting. He didn't speak, his gaze downcast, as if words had abandoned him. A lifetime of learning to control his emotions, never allowing himself to waver in public, now seemed to have vanished. In that moment, he was no longer a monarch, but merely a father broken by grief. Witnesses described it as a breathtaking scene. Queen Camilla sat beside him, gently placing her hand on his arm, a small but comforting gesture. When the meeting ended, the room remained silent. No one hurried to stand. No one dared make a sound. Then, one by one, they departed quietly. Their footsteps echoed down the long, cold marble corridors. Duty, the very foundation they had once held, was now insufficient to offer solace in this overwhelming grief. Now, what they faced was no longer matters of state or royal protocol, but the stark reality of loss, something no crown could shield or lessen. In another corner of the palace, Prince William and Princess Kate quietly passed the hours in silence. William, who had grown up within these familiar walls, was believed to be deeply distressed, but he still tried to remain strong because of his responsibilities. He focused all his attention on his children, trying to shield them from the heavy atmosphere that enveloped their home. Kate, as always, remained a silent pillar of support for the family. Without grand words, her unwavering presence held the pieces together in this fragile moment. At times, they were glimpsed through the window overlooking the courtyard, their silhouettes silhouetted against the fading afternoon light. They stood silently, their gazes distant, their faces etched with weariness and disbelief at the reality that had just arrived. Messages of condolence poured in from around the world. Heads of state, public figures, and strangers alike expressed their sympathy and love. Yet inside the palace, time seemed to stand still. Footsteps were rare. Meals were served and then left untouched. Even the ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual. Staff whispered to each other that they had never witnessed such a profound silence, a grief so pervasive that it made the space feel thick and heavy. As night fell on London, the lights in the palace went out one by one. The king chose to remain alone, withdrawing from meetings and visits. Buckingham Palace, long a symbol of power and stability, now appeared a very different space, a house steeped in mourning. Behind those stone walls, the family, burdened with the nation's expectations, could do nothing but grieve, not as royalty bound by duty, but as ordinary people, a father, a mother, and children facing a loss too great to name. For Prince William, this event was not only a test of responsibility, but also the breaking point of a burden he had carried for years. Those close to him had noticed the signs long before. He appeared less frequently in public, his smile less natural, his voice deeper and shorter. Even so, he still stepped out, shook hands, and fulfilled his expected role. But behind that calm exterior, something had begun to crack. The pressure of expectations, the responsibility of leadership, and personal pain finally piled up to an unbearable level. When the official announcement was made, William reportedly spent hours alone in his study at Adelaide Cottage, away from the cameras and his closest advisors. His phone rang incessantly, messages from important figures and family poured in, but for a time, he didn't reply to anyone. He sat silently, gazing out at the garden where his children usually played, trying to come to terms with the reality that had arrived so quickly and so violently. For a man who had spent his adult life balancing the roles of father, husband, and future king, that moment felt strange and heavy. Those who knew him said William had learned early on to control his emotions, realizing that the public not only listened to the royals' words, but also scrutinized their every expression. His composure thus became part of his protective shell, a shield forged over decades of living under constant scrutiny. But this time, that resilient facade had truly cracked. When he appeared before the cameras at the end of the day, his eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, devoid of his usual polite smile, and his carefully chosen voice. The nation saw not the image of power or the throne, but a man standing very close to the brink of unconcealed pain. Princess Kate stood beside him, still calm and elegant, her hand occasionally touching his as a silent gesture of support. Her presence became a solid anchor, a reminder that even in the darkest moment, they had each other. Standing together before the cameras, they faced the world's gaze with rare sincerity. William's voice trembled as he spoke. He thanked the public for their kindness and sympathy, each word slow, heavy, and often interrupted, as if continuing was already a great effort. When he asked for private space for his family to mourn, it wasn't a royal announcement, but a heartfelt plea from a husband and father trying to protect his dearest loved ones. After that brief appearance, they returned to Windsor, where the spotlight faded. A short announcement was made stating that the couple would temporarily withdraw from public life. Behind closed doors, William spent the evening with his children, trying to maintain familiar routines as a way of shielding them from the storm outside. He quietly fulfilled his role as a father, striving to keep his family strong amidst the grief. But no matter how hard he tried, the loss remained. The boy who had once walked behind his mother's coffin now faced another profound sorrow. This time, he was a man burdened with the responsibility of the future and a loss too great to bear. In that moment, the world saw not the image of a future king, but a man pushed to his limits, naked and fragile. Clinging to his family, he sought strength in the only thing left: love, the only thing that could hold him back from the brink of collapse. King Charles's dilemma was clearer than ever. The tragedy that swept through the palace was not just a national event, but a deep personal wound. The monarch who had spent his life preparing for leadership now faced the moment when responsibility clashed head-on with personal pain, right behind the solemn walls of Buckingham Palace. He walked silently down the long corridors, his mind torn between the duty of a leader and the grief of a father. The nation awaited his reassuring words. But within the palace, he grieved just as much as his family. The burden of the crown had never been heavier. His advisors met in secret, urging him to prepare a speech to the nation, to find words powerful enough to soothe a country engulfed in mourning. Yet each draft presented felt too formal, too distant, too empty. How could he speak as a king when his heart was broken like that of a father? He sat down at his desk, crossed out the prepared lines, and rewrote each sentence himself. When the final version was complete, it no longer carried the tone of a monarch. It was the voice of a father trying to find meaning in his own loss. As night fell, the palace began preparations for the broadcast. The camera was moved into one of the oldest rooms, where gilded frames and velvet curtains had witnessed countless historical moments, and now prepared to receive a heartfelt confession born from the most genuine pain. The king sat silently before a meticulously polished wooden table, dressed in simple black attire, his hands clasped together as if to maintain a fragile composure. Those present in the room later recounted that the silence was so heavy it was almost unbearable. When the red light signaling recording came on, he slowly raised his head and spoke. His voice was soft, slightly trembling, but heartbreakingly sincere. Gone were the carefully chosen words of royal protocol. Instead, words poured from the depths of his heart. He thanked the nation for its compassion, acknowledged the overwhelming grief, and confessed that even a monarch could not find the words to fully express his feelings. After all, we are all just human, he said softly, then paused to catch his breath. That simple statement resonated far and wide, permeating living rooms, pubs, hospitals, and cafes, spreading through television and radio waves with a weight no elaborately prepared speech could ever create. Families sat together in silence, faces illuminated by the pale blue screen. For the first time in generations, the distance that had existed between the monarchy and the people seemed to vanish. The king did not display his crown, but revealed the man behind it. When the speech ended, there was no applause, only a profound silence that spread beyond the palace gates. Thousands stood in the cold, some sobbing, others silently holding flickering candles. Those words could not erase the pain, but they accomplished something far greater. They united an entire nation in a shared feeling of humanity. In the days that followed, that message continued to resonate like a gentle whisper, reminding us that strength lies not in title or power, but in sincerity. King Charles appeared before the public with a dignified yet resolute bearing, carrying the nation's grief with rare composure. In that moment, he reminded Britain that true strength does not come from ceremony or glamour, but from compassion and the courage to show that even kings can fall. After the initial days since the announcement, the shock that gripped the nation gradually gave way to unanswered questions. The public wanted to understand what had truly happened behind the closed gates of Buckingham Palace. The prolonged silence following the king's speech only fueled curiosity. Whispers began to spread in newsrooms and on social media. Little by little, cautiously and reservedly, pieces of the truth began to emerge. The palace confirmed that the tragedy did not stem from scandal, politics, or power struggles, but from a far more personal cause. It had nothing to do with duty, image, or protocol. It was about loss, a loss that had deeply wounded the royal family, leaving wounds that would be difficult to heal over time. Those who had been in contact with the family in the days leading up to the announcement noted the evident exhaustion. Prince William, known for his calm and composed demeanor, appeared distant and quiet. Princess Kate, usually known for her elegant bearing, was also unusually taciturn. Palace officials described a simmering tension in the corridors, where everything was usually orderly and proper. Behind that quiet exterior, a private storm was silently brewing. For years, the burden of responsibility weighed heavily on every member of the family. Each public appearance was meticulously calculated, every smile, every gesture, every word, all at the cost of silent exhaustion. When the truth finally came to light, it was heartbreakingly simple. A profound and unexpected personal loss struck directly at the heart of the family. It was something they could not control, could not prevent. The event stripped away all layers of ceremony, leaving behind the very fragility of humanity behind titles and traditions. Those close to the royal family recounted that grief spread throughout the palace like a long shadow, touching everyone from senior advisors to newly hired staff. The tragedy not only shattered hearts, but also exposed the fragility of the boundary between duty and personal life. Royal observers look back on the journey leading up to this point and realize that constant scrutiny, relentless public demands, and almost unattainable expectations have taken a heavy toll. The monarchy has always been seen as a symbol of stability. But behind that facade, silent cracks had long been forming. The pressure to maintain a perfect image, to uphold tradition while adapting to the times, created a persistent tension that few outside the palace walls could understand. When the tragic event occurred, those cracks widened instantly. And when the public learned the truth, the reaction was not anger or speculation, but profound sympathy. The tragedy was too intimate, too human to be a subject of curiosity or gossip. People saw themselves in the family's pain, parents who had lost a child, siblings struggling together after a loss. The realization that even the royal family, often considered untouchable, could suffer similar pain brought the nation closer than ever before. As the palace issued a plea for privacy, a silent message began to spread throughout Britain. No matter how majestic, the monarchy is made up of ordinary people. Crowns and titles cannot shield them from grief. The truth behind the tragedy was not scandal or sensational mystery, but a familiar, heartbreaking loss. A reminder that even behind palace walls, human hearts can break, and no power can protect a family from loss. Across the United Kingdom, a somber atmosphere enveloped daily life. It began in London, where the usually bustling streets near Buckingham Palace became silent, steeped in sorrow. Strangers stood side by side, strangers yet bound by an invisible thread of shared grief. Their eyes were fixed on the palace gates, now a symbol of loss. The air was cold and damp, tinged with the scent of roses mingled with rain. Yet no one left. Some wept aloud, others stood silently, stunned, unable to find words to speak. The tragedy that befell the royal family was no longer just their story. That moment seemed to belong to the entire nation. Across cities in England, similar scenes unfolded simultaneously. In Edinburgh, people gathered outside Holyrood Palace, placing Scottish heather among bouquets of memorial flowers. In Cardiff, church bells echoed through the narrow streets as candles were lit in the quiet confines of cathedrals. In Belfast, people stood silently outside government buildings, holding familiar photographs of the royal family. As the Union Jack flag was lowered to half-mast, the entire nation seemed to pause in a shared moment of loss and reflection. The atmosphere was thick and somber, as if the United Kingdom were holding its breath in the face of overwhelming grief. Churches and cathedrals opened their doors, becoming refuges for souls seeking solace. Before St. Paul's Cathedral and Westminster Abbey, long lines of people stretched in silence. The soft candlelight cast a warm golden glow on the ancient walls, creating a solemn atmosphere. Inside, generations knelt together. Some prayed, others simply sat, listening to the silence. Clergy members spoke softly about compassion, humanity, and the power of unity in the face of sorrow. Unfamiliar hands reached out. Embraces needed no explanation. a way of sharing grief that transcended age and circumstances. The shock of this event transcended religious boundaries. Believers or disbelievers felt something deeply human. Even those who had once doubted the monarchy were moved in pubs, classrooms, and offices. Quiet conversations shifted, moving away from political debates to embrace empathy. People spoke less of the crown or title, and more of a family that had dedicated their lives to the country and was now suffering an irreplaceable loss. What had once seemed distant now felt heartbreakingly close. There were no longer lines between supporters and critics, only shared sorrow. Generations stood side by side in a way rarely seen in years. Elderly people who witnessed Queen Elizabeth II's coronation stood alongside younger generations who had grown up with William and Kate as symbols of hope for a new era. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders, whispering that they were witnessing a historic moment that would stay with them for life. Tragedy blurred the lines of age, class, and belief, uniting millions with shared compassion. In towns and villages, fires were lit throughout the long night. Candles reflected on the rain-soaked pavements, shimmering and fragile. Hymns echoed in the quiet air. Some put away toys and children's handwritten letters. Others tied royal ribbons to fences, gently swaying in the breeze. Volunteers brought blankets and hot drinks to those waiting outdoors. Strangers helped each other in quiet solidarity. It had been a long time since the United Kingdom felt like a family. The pain was immense, yet shared, and within that unity emerged a silent healing. As day turned into night, the palace remained silent. The flag hung almost motionless, as if the entire nation were pausing at its gates. The sea of flowers grew thicker, covering the sidewalks in a mosaic of colors and sorrow. Royal photographs, old and newly printed, lay interspersed among the bouquets. Candles burned despite the drizzle, the wax dripping onto the stone like silent whispers, not only for what had passed, but also for what was yet to come. England was in mourning, but at the same time, it was quietly waiting for a sign, a word, or a glimmer of hope for the future to gradually unfold behind the walls of Buckingham Palace. In Belfast, groups of people stood silently before government buildings, holding familiar photographs associated with the royal family. As the Union Jack flag was lowered, a sense of stillness permeated the air, as if the entire nation had entered a shared rhythm of reflection and loss. A somber atmosphere prevailed, so quiet that one could feel the sorrow silently spreading throughout the United Kingdom. Many churches and cathedrals remained open all day, becoming refuges for those seeking solitude. Before St. Paul's Cathedral and Westminster Abbey, long lines of people stood in respectful silence. Candlelight reflected on the ancient stone walls, casting a warm golden hue over the space. Inside, old and young knelt together. Some prayed, others sat quietly, letting their thoughts drift with the stillness. Clergy members spoke softly of compassion, empathy, and the strength of humanity in the face of loss. Stranger hands clasped together. Embraces needed no explanation, a comfort that transcended age and circumstances. The impact of this event extended far beyond religious beliefs. Whether believers or not, many felt something deeply, deeply human. Even those who had previously distanced themselves from the monarchy could not hide their emotions in pubs, classrooms, and workplaces. Conversations slowed, moving away from debate to embrace understanding. People spoke less about power or ceremony, and more about a family that had dedicated its life to the nation and was now suffering a great loss. What had once seemed distant became painfully close. There were no longer lines between agreement or disagreement, only shared grief. Generations stood side by side in a way rarely seen in years. Older generations, remembering Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, stood alongside younger generations who had grown up with William and Kate as symbols of a modern future. Parents cradled their children, gently explaining that they were witnessing a memorable historical moment. The event blurred the lines of age, class, and belief, connecting millions with profound empathy. In towns and villages, fires were lit throughout the night. Candlelight reflected on the damp pavement, fragile yet enduring. Hymns echoed in the quiet air. Some laid down small belongings and children's handwritten letters. Others tied royal ribbons to fences, gently swaying in the breeze. Volunteers brought blankets and hot drinks for those waiting outdoors. Strangers helped each other in silent solidarity. It had been a long time since the United Kingdom felt like a family. The pain was immense, yet shared, and it was within this shared bond that a quiet healing gradually took shape. As the day drew to a close and night fell, the palace remained silent. The flag hung almost motionless, as if the entire nation were pausing at its gates. The sea of flowers grew thicker, covering the sidewalks in a tapestry of color and sorrow. Royal photographs, old and new, were interspersed among the blossoms. Candles burned even in the drizzle, their wax dripping onto the stone like silent prayers, not only for what was lost, but also for an uncertain future. England was in mourning, but at the same time, it was quietly waiting for a sign, a message, or a glimmer of hope to emerge from behind the walls of Buckingham Palace. The story of the royal family has long been intertwined with responsibility and resilience. But this moment revealed something deeper, the very human fragility hidden behind the rituals and symbols. As Britain moves forward, the question still resonates, whether love and unity are strong enough to heal what has been lost. The world is watching, and so is history. For even the most powerful families are not immune to the shared human grief. A nation may grieve, but it is in that grief that people find connection, compassion, and the strength to move forward. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video until the very end. Your presence is not just a view, but also a companionship and a listener to the emotional stories told here. If this video resonated with you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments. Every emotion deserves to be heard. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share the video to continue exploring profound, humane, and untold stories with us. Your support is the greatest motivation for the channel to continue growing. Thank you, and see you in the next videos.